really pleased to be joined here with my colleagues, Representative Matt Soper, Representative Brianna Titone, DORA Executive Director Salazar, and others who you're going to hear from in just a moment. But we are here today to declare that enough is enough in Colorado. Over the last several years, too many Colorado families have had to face the gruesome and unacceptable reality that their loved ones' remains have been mishandled, lost, improperly cared for, sold, and completely disrespected by bad actors in our state. Bad actors that have held themselves out as funeral professionals that have no required training, no licenses, no oversight, and no accountability. I personally carry the stories of victims of the Shannon Kent funeral home tragedies that occurred in and around my district in the mountains. Bodies improperly stored for months in Silverthorne, misidentified cremains in a funeral home in total disrepair in Gypsum, and a stillborn baby's remains mixed with other remains and scrap metal in Leadville. Unfortunately, these gruesome stories are not unique to Colorado, and you're going to hear more today. For the last several years, community after community has seen tragedies like this play out. From Sunset Mesa, Shannon Kent funeral homes, Return to Nature in Penrose, and most recently Apollo in Denver, things have reached a breaking point. We simply cannot remain to be the only state in the nation that does not license funeral professionals, and that's why we're here today. This bipartisan bill that we are introducing today will finally create the oversight that Colorado families deserve. I'm grateful here to be standing with my co-sponsors, DORA Executive Director Patty Salazar, whose department has put their full recommendation and effort behind this bill, and impacted family members who should have had this accountability years ago. Establishing licensure of those who are entrusted with caring for our loved ones during a family's time of grief and mourning will ensure that Coloradans can trust the businesses and people that they go to and not have to worry about whether their loved one will be mistreated or their remains disrespected. It will also add legitimacy and credibility to the hundreds of funeral home operators and professionals that do a great job in our state and are having their reputations hurt by these bad actors. We must pass this bill. And with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Soper.
Thank you, Senator Roberts, and thank you very much for everyone being here today. 41 years ago, the state allowed the licensure of morticians, funeral directors, and cremationists to lapse. And today we're announcing that we're going to take steps to bring licensure back. We're the only state in America that doesn't require a licensure. And that's also why almost all the horrific stories that we've heard around the nation come out of Colorado. I was shocked when I first heard these stories in 2018 when I was first running for the legislature. I remember going to a memorial service for the victims of Sunset Mesa. Each victim would stand up and they would announce where the FBI had told where their loved ones' bodies had ended up, and in fact they had been given pieces of concrete and told those were the cremated remains. That was the first I began hearing about the horrific stories of what's happening in Colorado funeral homes. And then Shannon Kent in Leadville. And then not long after that, we had Penrose. And then Apollo here in Denver. And even within the DORA Sunrise Review, 20 cases were listed of funeral home abuses. What we're doing here with licensure is about restoring confidence in Colorado's funeral industry. It's ensuring that victims also have protection. It's also ensuring that future Coloradans that are using funeral homes know that the state is looking out for their best interests. We currently license hairdressers. We currently inspect restaurants. We need to be doing something similar, or certainly more so, for funeral homes. Because someone who's in a funeral home is their worst day of their life. Their loved one has died. And they don't want to be thinking about the fact that, is this funeral home taking care of my loved one with the right cooler conditions? Are they treating my loved one's body with dignity? They don't want to be thinking about that. They want to be thinking of this time of loss and grieving. And that's why it's appropriate for the state to step in here and to regulate the funeral home industry. I'm proud to be on this bill with Senator Roberts and Representative Titone and appreciate DORA's full support behind this bill and our other companion bill that's going along here with this. With this, I will turn this over to DORA Executive Director Patty Salazar. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Soper, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am Patty Salazar, the Executive Director of the Department of Regulatory Agencies. As the state's umbrella regulatory authority, DORA regulates more than 50 industries in Colorado through the work of our 10 distinct statutory divisions, which includes the Division of Professions and Occupations, which oversees the regulation of funeral homes and crematories. Our agency is also responsible for administering the Colorado Sunset and Sunrise statutes through the Colorado Office of Policy Research and Regulatory Reform, known as COPR, which is housed in the Executive Director's office. Our regulatory philosophy is that we regulate to the 10%, recognizing that this may look different for each industry depending on the potential for harm. The vast majority of professionals and businesses will and want to do the right thing. They will comply with the law and will serve their customers with the utmost professionalism and integrity. I have directly experienced this with funeral home professionals throughout the state that have shared why they chose this profession and have shared their knowledge and expressed the fulfillment they receive when they are helping families during the most difficult, vulnerable times. Unfortunately, and as we've seen, there's always a fraction of incidents of harm, either intentional or unintentional, that we have a duty to mitigate, and which we have, again, unfortunately seen in our state. In the 1980s, the funeral home industry was significantly deregulated. While the landscape has transformed since then, there's a clear regulatory gap that exists and that we must address. It is clear that Colorado needs additional regulation to rebuild the public trust and integrity of the death care industry. In 2022, DORA worked with the General Assembly, and in fact with these two legislative leaders to my left, to grant inspection authority for current registrants, but again, it is evident that we need to go further. Last October, our agency released a sunset report that recommended additional regulation for funeral establishments and crematories. As that report was being released, we were also drafting and finalizing the Sunrise Review for funeral home professionals, which is a separate statutory review. Both the sunset review of the establishments and the Sunrise Review of the individuals in this industry has given Colorado an opportunity to take a holistic yet balanced approach on how we reform the funeral home industry to rebuild the public trust. I would like to extend my sincerest appreciation for Senator Roberts and for Representative Soper and Representative Titone for their leadership to help us reform this industry. I would also like to acknowledge the Colorado Funeral Directors Association, who requested that we conduct a review of funeral home professionals. This legislation, again, takes a balanced approach to ensure competency in the funeral industry while providing an appropriate pathway for licensure for those who are already working in the industry. Funeral home professionals are responsible for various aspects of death care services, ranging from ensuring public health to upholding ethics during a difficult time for families in grief. By bringing Colorado requirements for this industry up to the national standard, we are also able to promote mobility to address workforce needs and will no longer be regarded as a state where those who cannot get licensed out will retreat. I recognize that there are many people in this industry, including those who've been trying to best serve their communities for years, who may have reservations or concerns about the impacts that legislative and regulatory changes will have on their businesses. I'm also confident that we share a common goal. It is our responsibility that every Coloradan has access to quality, competent death care services. We all know the several egregious incidents that have been highlighted on a national scale, which demonstrates how the legislative and regulatory framework has failed Coloradans who have experienced loss and unfortunately sought funeral services from grossly incompetent funeral professionals. With this legislation, we will give the state the additional tools necessary to ensure national standards of competency are met. I want to acknowledge that there may be many of you in this room with questions that are related to recent investigations and cases. Given the active and sensitive nature of these investigations, we are unable to discuss the details to ensure the integrity of these investigations. Yet even if I cannot get into specifics on active investigations, again, there's a general understanding that things must change. Colorado needs to and will do better with the passage of this legislation. And with that, I will hand it over to Sheila Jones.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. In October of 2019, our daughter died. We saw this beautiful website that said that they would give us a nice treat when they cremated her. In October 26th of 2024, the FBI called us and told us to come in. From that moment on, and I found out our daughter had been in Penrose for 4 years, decaying, piled up on top of other bodies. From that moment on, I started making phone calls. I said, there's a reason this happened. There's something wrong that was allowed this to happen to anyone. So I started making phone calls, and I started calling the people in the industry. I started calling people I knew that were legislators, and I said, what's wrong? I'm reading these laws, and they're horrible, and they're bad, and we need to do something now so this doesn't happen to anybody else. My grief will always be there. Everyone's grief, from Return to Nature to Sunset Mason, anyone who's gone through any type of problems with funeral homes, that doesn't go away. None of it goes away. You live it every day. But we can change these laws, and this bill has that potential. A man who contacted me, whose aunt was in Penrose, and he's a funeral director in Detroit. And he says to me, Sheila, he goes, you know, when people come to me and they complain about not being able to get through all the hard work they have to do to get a license to be in the funeral industry, everybody laughs and says, you know, you can go to Colorado and you can be a funeral director tomorrow. Now, how would you feel if they told you that? Now, think about that. Colorado's the laughing stock of the industry because we don't have licensing. This bill has the potential to bring accountability and to bring credibility to an industry that needs to be regulated. Self-regulation for the funeral industry has not worked. They tried, and this is what happens. One of the important parts of this bill is criminal background checks, which keeps criminals out of Colorado. Think about that. A criminal background check to be a funeral director. How important is that? All we're asking for is dignity and depth, done by professional people that know what they're doing. People who have an education in the background, a passion, and they are out there. There are people in this industry who do have a passion, who do have the education, who are willing to be licensed. This is not something that's going to hurt the industry or something that's going to scare them away. Will this prevent happening what's happened to me? I don't know. I don't know it will. But I do know that it'll keep criminals out of Colorado. A line for this bill considering this session are designed to protect you from having to go through the continued horror that many of us have already experienced. So remember this. When you go to bury your loved one, whether it's a child, whether it's a son, a daughter, an aunt, an uncle, or a grandparent, think about it. Are you going to trust the person? Are you going to trust them if they're unlicensed? Or are you going to trust them if they're licensed? Are you going to trust them if they have the educational background? People don't think about those things because they're in grief, and they don't have time to think about those things, and that's the sad part. So, the state of Colorado has come up with a group of bills. This is not the only bill. There's another bill, it's 1335, I want you to look at too, because this will help with regulations. It'll help also with inspections, and this is what we need. Inspections are extremely important. And I would call on DORA today to go and inspect every funeral home in Colorado and bring in inspectors from other states to do it, because it needs to be done in order for us to have a baseline to know where the problem lies. Thank you very much. Thank you for this bill. It's a wonderful bill. There's, a couple of things that I've said to you that I think is missing, and I'm sure you will get input from all the victims and all the families out there. I'd like to introduce George Rosales. George is also a victim and a family member. So, George.
I did as much research as Sheila did. I just had, 18 months, my wife was decomposing in the back of the car at Apollo Funeral Home, his residence, while he was getting evicted. I probably wouldn't have found out about my wife's body if he wasn't getting evicted. This is actually still happening to today. We have to change the laws so this doesn't happen to anybody else. I had to relive my wife's life over again. My family's all in tears. I can't it's just a horrific thing to have to go through again. After 18 months, I buried my wife, and then I get a call from the FBI. It's not something, no one should ever have to get that call. And I'm glad that we're putting in this legislature and these regulations on this funeral industry so that you guys in the future never have to live what I had to live through, what she had to live through, what everybody is subject to nowadays. So let's move this bill forward and start not getting my beautiful state of Colorado a black eye. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, George, and Sheila. Absolutely heartbreaking and very difficult to share your story. We're grateful for you for being here. I'm just going to walk quickly through the details of the bill, high level. Everyone will get sent out the bill shortly after this. It will be introduced later today. But just to make sure everyone's on the same page, and then we'd be happy to take a few questions. So, what this legislation proposes to do, I should mention we have Representative Titone here, who will be a co-prime in the House. This is going to start in the Senate with myself and Senator Bob Gardner from Colorado Springs. So bipartisan in both chambers. We're grateful for that effort. So this bill proposes to establish a system in Colorado that requires any individual to obtain a license if they want to practice as a funeral director, a mortuary science practitioner, an embalmer, a cremationist, or a natural reductionist, starting on January 1st, 2026. To be eligible for this license, a person must have graduated from an accredited educational institution for that profession, passed the national board examination, completed an apprenticeship of at least 1 year, and pass a criminal background check. Prior to that date, and as has been alluded to by several of the speakers, we have hundreds of people practicing these professions already in Colorado, many of them doing an excellent job. We of course need their services every day. So we want to find a way to allow the good actors, the professionals in this state to be able to continue operating their business. So prior to January 1, 2026, anybody currently working in the industry may obtain a provisional license by showing that they have worked at least 6,500 hours of work in that field, completed an apprenticeship at one point during their career of at least a year long, and pass a criminal background check. The bill, of course, has many other provisions that you will see shortly, but that's the high level of what the bill proposes to do. So with that, we'd be happy to take any questions. Catherine.
I got a bunch.
Okay.
First of all, the bill says that they have to pass either the art or science or art and science portion of the national exam. Why is it limited to that?
So that is specific to each type of profession. So I think the funeral director is just the art portion of the degree, and the mortuary scientist is going to be the art and science.
But what does that mean? The science thing I get, the art thing I'm a little confused about.
Okay, is that a question that Dora can answer? Yeah, knowing about the education.
Sure, thank you for that question, Marianne. That is consistent with the national standards as it relates to funeral directors to take the arts portion of the test. I'm looking over at my division director to make sure that we're getting that
But
accurate.
what is the arts portion? What is it ask?
So it is under, I don't have the specific questions for you, but if you do look at the International Conference of Funeral Home Oversight Regulators, I believe is the acronym of the association, they are the entity that administers the national test, and there's a breakdown of the curriculum for the different aspects of both the arts portion as well as the science portion of the test. That again is what other states have across the country.
The other question I want to ask, mortuary science practitioners, is that any employee of a funeral home, or how are they different from a funeral home director or an embalmer? Where does that fit?
That particular license type is intended to be covering if you're choosing to serve as both a funeral director as well as provide the services of being an embalmer. So if you're trying to do multiple aspects of funeral service activity, that's intended to be intentional.
Director Salazar, will you have the resources to enforce these licenses? I spoke to someone who made a complaint about Apollo in 2022, says that there was a follow-up, but really no information, and then got a call a day before the news broke about the eviction of Salazar's house. So, will you have the resources to even enforce this?
So as part of the legislative process, we will also be attaching a fiscal note. Once the bill is officially introduced, our department will go back and look at what resources will be needed to ensure that we are actually able to enact the bill that's going to be passed.
And on a transparency angle, I know that your office has kind of withheld some admonishments and letters that have been sent to some of the practitioners who are already licensed. Don't you have to have some form of transparency to earn back trust?
So with most of our license types, again, we regulate more than 60 industries in the state of Colorado. Once enforcement actions are able to be publicly available on our website. And then, of course, I know with many members of the media, we have been responsive to callers that have come in related to complaints and have been able to disclose what we can when the time is appropriate.
What will enforcement look like?
So again, I invite you to take a look at the legislation once it's introduced. There will be a section in there related to grounds for discipline that is very consistent with other practice acts that we regulate.
Senator, can you talk about, you're saying, you know, there are bad actors in the state and this shouldn't happen. How does licensing prevent this from happening again?
So I think it's important to note, unfortunately, we can't stop every bad actor in this industry or any industry that is licensed. There's always, individual cases that pop up. However, we've seen a pattern specifically in this industry, and I think it's fair, and I believe, to assume that the lack of licensure, the lack of basic training, and then the lack of oversight, because when you don't have a license, it's not anything to enforce, that will create a culture of accountability in Colorado that folks need to obviously get the type of training that they need in order to get the license, so they're going to have the education and background. And then if there are disciplinary issues, then the department can come in and discipline and take corrective action. As you heard Ms. Canfield-Jones mention, Colorado has become a dumping ground for people who have committed bad acts in other states, or simply don't want to get the education or put in the time to do this job correctly. We are literally the only state out of 50 states that doesn't do this, and we don't see the types of tragedies like this in other states.
Quick follow-up, can you tell us why it's January of 26, why this isn't happening sooner?
So, of course, assuming this passes this legislative session, gets signed by the governor, will get implemented, and rulemaking will have to occur by the department. So we're looking at only about a year and a half between when the bill hopefully is signed and when it takes effect. But the requirements to get a provisional license if you want to continue working in this industry will start immediately. So there will be oversight immediately upon the governor's signature of this bill.
Do you have the governor's support?
I wanted to add one thing, and yes, we do. But the one thing I did want to add was we've heard lots of stories of people coming to Colorado from other states that may have had disciplinary actions. So having a criminal background check is really important, and then having licensure here means we can block them from entering the industry. The other element that's important to remember, we don't actually know who all is in the industry right now. So having that provisional license and seeing who all is in the industry is a major, major first step forward.
I know some families wanted funeral homes to be required to carry insurance. Why was that not part of this bill?
So that, and Director Salazar, correct me if I'm wrong, that was not a part of the original Sunrise application that was submitted by the Funeral Directors Association and with support from some legislators. That's a conversation we're willing to continue to have during the legislative process, and whether it happens in this bill or as a future conversation, it's not an unreasonable idea.
What's the reaction from the funeral home industry?
Well, as was mentioned, the original Sunrise application, which is what proposes licensure, was submitted by the Colorado Funeral Directors Association. These are people that work in the industry and were frankly sick and tired of their reputations being tarnished by these bad actors in these horrible cases. So it's fair to say there's a large portion of the funeral professionals in Colorado that support the idea of licensure, and then I believe are going to be supportive of this bill. They've been an integral part of the process with drafting and with coming up with the legislative language, and so we do have a great deal of support. They've actually essentially come to the state, and I started talking to them 3 years ago about this. They wanted licensure. They want this accountability, but they also want this because it gives the good actors in our state a better reputation. It gives them something to point to that says, I've done the education, I've completed the training, and I'm a good actor.
I'm going to add to that a little bit. Imagine being a funeral home operator in a small town where you already have gone through education, you have years of experience, you do a good service, and then someone files business paperwork to be able to set up shop. They probably come in from another state, they don't have a license, they were a bad actor in another state, they're gonna continue to be a bad actor here, and there's no mechanism to say, hey, what they're doing is wrong. They don't understand our mortuary science laws, they are probably dealing with something criminal, and what we're doing here will allow that to be addressed.
Why does SCI or just funeral home cooperative? Why are they? We're hearing that they're going to lobby against this bill. Why would they?
Yeah, I mean, they're, concerned that, this might increase their cost of doing business. That's a concern, but we've been working to strike that balance here because we don't want to run good operators out of the industry. And we also don't want to make it expensive to bury your loved ones in Colorado. I mean, that's something we talk about every single day that we don't want to do. And so we've been working to reassure them that that's not going to be the case.
How does this compare with the licensure process in other states? Is it tougher, lighter, more expensive?
Yeah, it's my understanding, but perhaps you could elaborate a bit more, that it's very similar to other states, that we will be on par with our sister states across the nation. But as far as the nuances of where we rank, I would yield to Director Salazar.
As I shared during my remarks, we are raising ourselves up to the national standard when it comes to ensuring competency in the industry. Again, not knowing exactly what the General Assembly is going to pass at the end of this legislative session, I would definitely say that we're putting ourselves definitely towards the middle of the national standard. Again, we're definitely not going to be the most restrictive state in the country, but we will no longer be the most permissive.
Did the Apollo and Penrose investigation drive you to this, or was this in the works, or other cases that we weren't familiar with that drove you to create this?
For me, I had been listening to folks that came to me to talk about licensure ever since Sunset Mesa. So ever since 2018, when I was first running for the legislature, was when I first began thinking we need to bring back licensure. But you also need to hit a political window where your opportunity is such that you can pass legislation. And for us, it's right now. I mean, certainly Penrose and Apollo added fuel to the fire for us to get this done. So certainly right now, the reason is we've had headline stories that are horrific.
And for me, this is a long time in the making as well. As I mentioned in my opening comments, I started hearing from constituents in my district in 2019 and 2020 about the Shannon Kent funeral tragedies in the mountains, where human bodies were being mistreated, remains were being mixed with metal, funeral homes were in complete disrepair. This was 2019 and 2020. I actually then requested the bill title for licensure of funeral professionals in June of last year, right after we got done with our 2023 session. And started working with the Funeral Directors Association to submit their Sunrise application. And then Penrose, of course, happened a few months after that. So while the timing is certainly poignant, this is frankly a long time coming, something we've been working on for a few years, including a bill that Brett Soper and I passed in 2022 to allow inspections of the funeral homes themselves.
I had a question. Can I ask you guys a question? I have a question. In the proposed idea of a temporary license, right, as it is, what type of testing will you require of those people to show that they know, and have an educational background and know what they're doing before you issue the license?
So the provisional license, which will last for about a year and a half, if in order to even get a provisional license, you need to be able to show at least 6,500 hours of work in that field. And then you need to show that at one point during your career you completed an apprenticeship of at least a year long. So you show that you learned from somebody else who hopefully was licensed either in Colorado or another state, because we used to have licensure back until 1983. And then you also need to pass that criminal background check if you need reference. So,
but there's no testing. Educational testing.
We're in a tough situation where there are people who've been running businesses here for decades. Some are later in life. I think it's unrealistic to ask them to go back to school and get a degree and put their business on hold. and then we would likely lose that service in our community. So we think the 6,500 hours plus the apprenticeship plus the background check will allow us to identify those in Colorado that know what they're doing and hopefully can continue their work.
I have a question. I just want to make sure I understand things correctly. Right now, today, Miles, Hartford, John, Halford, Perry, Halford, they can open a new funeral home today in Colorado. Is that right?
Yes, I mean they're facing criminal charges, of course, so they have that going on in their life. But yes, technically, there would be nothing preventing them from doing that.
How's a service like a funeral home? Is it regulated, oversaw? When we have, like I said, a barbershop is. How does that happen, and especially for this long?
So I'll just briefly say, and then you can maybe talk about your sunset bill. So funeral homes in Colorado are licensed and overseen by the Department of Regulatory Affairs, the actual building and the business, but the people who work inside the building are not. They used to be until 1983, when a sunset bill came through this legislature, similar to the dozens of sunsets we do every year. And for whatever reason, and I don't know if we've confirmed the reason why back in 1983, that bill didn't pass. And so the licensure went away, it sunsetted. The legislature in 2005 made an effort to license funeral professionals again. That bill actually passed both the House and the Senate, and was vetoed by Governor Owens. And so that has put us to this place where we are now. So the businesses, the buildings, and the operations are licensed, but not the people within them.
People do it to this. I was just going to add on a little bit more because there is a companion bill that the same sponsors are working on. That's House Bill 1335, and that will continue the regulation of the business entity that's known as the funeral home. What we're announcing here today is the licensure of the people who work within the funeral home. And within our sunset bill, we are going to add some more powers to DORA to ensure that they actually can regulate. If we're going to have a regulation, we want the agency to actually be able to go in and do some random inspections, not just during normal business hours. So those are the types of things we want to look at in chain of custody.
One more question.
On the sunset bill briefly, the bill says routine inspections. Is there any sense of how routine that would be? Would it be annual, every 5 years?
Take a stab at them to.
Thank you for that question. So that will be part of our rulemaking process. We've had several internal conversations as to what exactly that should look like to be most appropriate. One thing that I will add that is explicit in the sunset itself is that it does give us the ability to inspect after a license has been lapsed. So if someone does not renew, or if they just, something bad happens, we're able to go in within a certain amount of time and inspect afterwards. But we'll have more on the cadence of inspections.
Thank you, everyone.